The puppy wouldn't stop following Officer Daniel Reeves, not begging, not barking, just staring like it knew something he didn't. And when he finally gave in, it led him through rain-soaked streets and into a silent, abandoned house where the air felt wrong, heavy, like it was holding its breath. Then he heard it, a faint, broken gasp, and found a child barely alive, wrapped in the puppy's warmth. And in that moment, Daniel realized this tiny dog had been guarding that life for hours, maybe longer, refusing to leave. And something inside him broke, because he knew this dog hadn't just saved the child, it had saved him too. Some dogs don't follow you for food. They follow you because you're the only one who can help. The rain fell in a slow, steady rhythm against the windshield as Officer Daniel Reeves sat in his patrol car, engine idling, the soft hum filling the silence he had long grown used to. The street was nearly empty, just a stretch of wet asphalt reflecting dull orange streetlights, the kind of quiet that felt heavier than noise. Daniel rubbed a hand over his jaw, feeling the rough stubble there, his eyes scanning nothing in particular, just passing time like he had been for years now, one shift blending into the next. That's when he saw it. A small shape in the middle of the road, barely more than a shadow at first, unmoving despite the rain soaking through its thin fur. He frowned, leaning forward slightly, squinting through the glass. It was a puppy, no more than a few months old, its body trembling, ears lowered, but its eyes were locked on him. Not wandering, not fearful, just fixed, as if it had been waiting. Daniel sighed under his breath, reaching for the door handle. Not tonight, he muttered, already tired before stepping out. The cold air hit him instantly, sharp and damp, carrying the faint metallic scent of rain against pavement. His boots splashed softly as he approached, water pooling around the curb. "Hey, buddy," he called out, voice calm but distant. The puppy didn't move. It didn't run, didn't bark, didn't even wag its tail. It just watched him, chest rising and falling quickly, like it had been holding something in for too long. Daniel crouched slightly, extending a hand, expecting the usual, fear, hesitation, maybe a slow approach. But instead, the puppy took a single step back, then turned around. It paused, glancing over its shoulder, meeting his eyes again. Then it walked a few feet forward, stopped, and looked back once more. Daniel straightened, brows tightening. "What are you doing?" he murmured. The puppy repeated the motion, step, stop, look. Not random, not lost. Intentional. A quiet signal. The rain softened, almost as if the world itself was holding its breath. Daniel felt something shift inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not urgency, not fear, something quieter. Curiosity, the kind that pulls you forward even when you don't want to follow. He hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the patrol car, the warm glow inside waiting for him, safe, predictable. Then he looked at the puppy again. It was still there, waiting, not begging, not leaving, just waiting. Daniel exhaled slowly, the sound visible in the cold air. "All right," he said under his breath. "I'm coming." And the moment he took that first step after it, the puppy didn't look back again, as if it already knew he would follow. The puppy moved with quiet certainty, its small paws tapping softly against the wet pavement as it led Daniel down the dimly lit street, away from the familiar glow of storefronts, and into a stretch of town that felt forgotten by time, where the streetlights flickered and the buildings stood with windows dark and silent, their shapes blurred by the lingering rain, and Daniel found himself following without speaking, his boots echoing faintly behind it, each step pulling him further from the routine he understood and deeper into something he could not yet name. The air growing cooler, carrying a faint scent of damp wood and rust, and every few yards the puppy slowed just enough to glance back, not with fear, but with quiet assurance, as if checking that he was still there, still willing, still listening. And something about that steady rhythm began to settle into him, the way a memory sometimes returns without warning, soft but persistent, until it fills the space you did not realize was empty, and he noticed how the world around them seemed to grow quieter with every turn, the distant hum of traffic fading, replaced by the subtle creak of loose metal signs swaying in the breeze and the soft drip of water falling from broken gutters, until finally the puppy turned sharply into a narrow alley barely wide enough for a person to walk through, its entrance half hidden between two aging brick buildings, and Daniel paused at the edge, his eyes scanning the darkness ahead, instinct tightening slightly in his chest, not from danger, but from the unknown, the kind that does not shout but waits, patient and still, and for a brief moment he considered turning back, telling himself it was just a stray animal leading him nowhere, that he had done enough simply by noticing it. But then the puppy stepped a little further into the alley and stopped again, looking back at him one more time, its small frame outlined by the faint light behind it. And there was something in that gaze that held him there, something steady and unwavering, as if the animal understood the weight of hesitation and refused to let it win. And Daniel exhaled slowly, the breath visible in the cool night air, before stepping forward into the narrow passage, the sound of his boots shifting from pavement to damp gravel, the walls on either side rising higher and closing in slightly, the space carrying a deeper chill that seemed to linger beneath the surface. And as he followed, he became aware of a new detail, something so faint he almost missed it at first, a subtle sound woven into the silence, uneven and soft, like a breath that struggled to find its rhythm. And the puppy heard it too, its ears lifting, body stilling for a moment, before it moved again with greater urgency, no longer pausing as often, guiding him deeper until the alley opened into a small, enclosed yard hidden from the street, where an old wooden structure leaned slightly to one side, its door half ajar, swaying just enough to create a slow, hollow creak that echoed into the night. And Daniel felt his pulse shift, not racing, but sharpening, his senses narrowing toward that single point. And the puppy moved toward the doorway without hesitation, stopping, just at the threshold, not entering, only waiting, as if this was the place it had been trying to reach all along. And Daniel stood a few steps behind, the faint sound now clearer, fragile and real, rising and falling from somewhere inside. And in that quiet moment, he understood that this had never been about a lost dog at all, but something waiting to be found, something that had trusted this small, silent guide to bring the right person to its door. Daniel stepped closer to the doorway, the old wood shifting slightly as the wind pressed against it, the faint creak stretching into the quiet like a warning that had been waiting too long to be heard. And he could feel the air change as he reached the threshold, cooler inside, heavier somehow, carrying the scent of dust, damp boards, and something else he could not immediately place, something human, and the soft, uneven sound he had noticed before became clearer now, not loud, not urgent, but fragile, like someone holding on to the smallest thread of strength. And he lowered himself slightly as he stepped inside, his boots pressing gently against the worn floor, careful, controlled, every movement deliberate, the way old training had taught him to enter unknown spaces without disturbing what might be waiting. And behind him the puppy remained at the doorway, not crossing, only watching, its small body still but its eyes fixed on Daniel with quiet intensity, as if this final step was his to take alone. And as his eyes adjusted to the dim interior, shapes began to form out of shadow, broken furniture pushed against the walls, a small table tilted to one side, a blanket lying uneven across the floor near the far corner. And that was where the sound came from, a soft breath, barely there, rising and falling in a rhythm that did not feel steady enough. And Daniel felt something tighten in his chest, not fear, but recognition, the kind that comes from moments that echo something buried deep in memory. And he moved closer, slowly lowering himself to one knee, his voice calm and steady as he spoke into the quiet. "Hey, you are not alone. I am here." The words gentle, not just for whoever lay beneath the blanket, but perhaps for himself as well. And as he reached out, his hand hovering for a brief second before touching the fabric, he felt the faint warmth beneath it, real, present, alive. And he carefully pulled the edge back just enough to see, revealing a small figure, curled tightly, a child no older than 8 or 9, face pale but peaceful in a way that did not match the cold room around them. And Daniel let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding, his mind already shifting into focus, assessing, steadying, grounding himself in the present. But even as he reached for his radio, his eyes moved briefly back toward the doorway, where the puppy still stood, unmoving, silent, watching. And in that moment something clicked into place with a quiet certainty that did not need explanation. The child was not alone when it mattered most, and neither, somehow, was And as he spoke into the radio with calm precision, requesting assistance, his free hand remained near the child, not rushing, not overwhelming, just present, offering a quiet assurance that the long wait in the silence had finally come to an end, and outside the rain had nearly stopped, leaving only the soft drip of water from the roof, each drop marking time as it returned, slowly, gently, back to something that felt like hope. The sound of the sirens grew closer, threading through the quiet like a distant heartbeat returning to life, and Daniel remained where he was, grounded in the stillness of the moment, his attention shifting between the child and the small puppy who had not moved from its place, its body curled protectively near the blanket, eyes alert yet calm, as if it understood that help was coming but still refused to leave its post until it arrived. And there was something in that quiet loyalty that settled deeper into Daniel than he expected, something that did not need words or explanation, only presence. And as the faint red and blue reflections began to flicker against the walls through the doorway, he leaned slightly closer to the child again, his voice low and steady as he spoke. "You are doing good, just stay with me." Not knowing if the words were fully heard, but trusting that tone carried meaning where sound might not. And the child's breathing continued, fragile but consistent. A small rhythm holding on through the cold, and the puppy shifted just enough to press a little closer. Its warmth subtle but intentional, and Daniel noticed the way its ears flicked toward every distant sound, tracking the approaching help long before it arrived. Its instincts sharp, focused, unwavering. And for a moment he found himself studying it, this small creature that had crossed distance, weather, and silence without hesitation, carrying something far greater than its size should have allowed. And he wondered how long it had been here, how long it had waited, how many times it had looked toward empty streets before finally finding someone who would follow. And the thought settled heavily in his chest, not as guilt, but as recognition, because he knew what it meant to wait for something that might never come, and yet still remain. And the sirens finally reached the alley, their sound no longer distant but present, controlled. And as footsteps approached, voices low and coordinated, Daniel raised a hand slightly to signal his position, his voice answering back clearly, guiding them in. And within moments the doorway filled with movement, uniforms, equipment, quiet urgency that did not break the calm but joined it. And as the responders knelt beside him, assessing, preparing, speaking in steady tones, Daniel shifted back just enough to give them space, his eyes moving once more to the puppy, expecting it to retreat now that others had arrived. But it did not. It remained exactly where it had been, watching, present, as if it needed to see this through to the end. And Daniel let out a slow breath, his shoulders lowering as the weight he had carried without noticing began to ease, replaced by something quieter, something steadier. And as he stood slowly, stepping back toward the doorway, the cool night air meeting him again, he glanced once more at the scene inside, the child now surrounded, cared for, no longer alone, and the puppy, still there, still watching. And in that quiet transition, as the rain finally stopped completely and the world seemed to settle into a softer silence, Daniel understood something simple but undeniable. Sometimes the ones who cannot speak are the ones who guide us exactly where we are needed most. The paramedics worked with quiet efficiency, their movements practiced and steady, voices low as they checked the child's breathing, adjusting the blanket, preparing a stretcher with careful hands that respected the fragile calm in the room. And Daniel stood just outside the doorway now, giving space but not leaving, his presence anchored to the moment, as if stepping away too soon might somehow undo what had just been found. And the night air felt different against his skin, no longer sharp and cold but softened, carrying the faint scent of wet pavement cooling under the absence of rain. And he watched as the child was gently lifted, wrapped securely, the small rise and fall of breath still there, still holding on. And the puppy moved for the first time since the responders arrived, not in fear, not retreating, but stepping closer, following the motion with quiet focus, its small body trailing alongside as if ensuring the journey continued. And one of the paramedics glanced down, offering a brief, understanding nod, allowing the space without interruption. And Daniel felt something shift again, deeper this time, as he realized the puppy was not just leading to a place, it was staying until the story reached its next chapter, and as the stretcher was guided carefully through the doorway and into the open air, the flashing lights casting soft reflections across the wet ground, Daniel stepped aside, his eyes following the movement, the rhythm of boots, the gentle hum of equipment, all blending into a controlled flow that carried the child away from the silence of that abandoned space and back toward something safer, something warmer, and the puppy followed without hesitation, staying close to the stretcher, its small paws moving quickly but steadily, never straying, and Daniel found himself walking behind them, not out of duty, not because anyone had asked him to, but because something in him refused to let the moment in just yet. And as they reached the ambulance, the doors open and waiting, the paramedics lifted the stretcher inside with practiced care, securing it in place, their movements precise yet gentle. And for a brief second the puppy paused at the edge, looking up, its body still, as if asking a silent question about where it belonged next. And Daniel stepped forward without thinking, his voice low but certain as he spoke. "Go on. It is okay." And the puppy hesitated only a heartbeat longer before jumping lightly into the ambulance, settling near the child once more, its presence unwavering. And Daniel stood there, watching as the doors closed with a soft, final sound, the kind that does not shut something out, but carries something forward. And as the engine started and the lights shifted, no longer flashing but steady, he felt the quiet weight of the night begin to lift from his shoulders, replaced by something unfamiliar yet welcome, a sense that for once he had not arrived too late. And as the ambulance pulled away, disappearing down the street with a low hum, Daniel remained standing in the soft glow of the streetlight, his breath visible in the cooling air, and for the first time in a long while, the silence around him did not feel empty. It felt complete, as if something unseen had been set right. And though he could not fully explain it, he knew with quiet certainty that some paths are not chosen. They are given, and sometimes they begin with the smallest footsteps leading the way. The street grew quiet again after the ambulance disappeared, its distant hum fading into the night until only the soft echo of dripping water remained. And Daniel stood there longer than he needed to, his hands resting loosely at his sides, his eyes fixed on the empty road, as if something might return if he waited just a little longer. But nothing did. Only the stillness remained, calm and complete, and he let out a slow breath, turning slightly as he made his way back toward the alley, his boots pressing against the damp pavement with a steady rhythm, not rushed, not reluctant, just present. And as he stepped once more into the narrow passage, the space felt different now, no longer heavy with uncertainty but softened, as if whatever had been waiting there had finally been heard. And he paused at the entrance to the small yard, looking toward the old wooden structure, the door still slightly open, swaying gently in the cooling air, and for a moment he considered stepping inside. Again, retracing the steps, confirming what had already been resolved. But instead he remained where he was, understanding that some places are meant to be entered only once. Their purpose fulfilled the moment they are found. And he turned away, walking back toward the street, the faint glow of the patrol car coming into view, its presence steady and familiar, yet somehow changed, as if the same space now carried a different weight. And when he reached the driver's side door, he paused, his hand resting on the handle, his reflection faintly visible in the glass, rain streaks distorting the lines of his face. And he studied it for a second, not searching for anything specific, just noticing, the tiredness still there, the years still written in the corners of his eyes, but something else too, something quieter, something that had not been there at the start of the night. And he opened the door, sliding into the seat as the soft warmth wrapped around him again, the familiar scent of worn leather and faint coffee filling the space. And he sat there without starting the engine, hands resting on the wheel, eyes forward, letting the silence settle in a different way this time, not pressing in, but holding steady. And his mind drifted, not to the routine calls or reports that usually filled his thoughts, but to the small details, the way the puppy had stood in the rain without moving, the way it had looked back just enough to guide, never forcing, never leaving. And he realized that nothing about it had been accidental, not the timing, not the place, not even the quiet persistence that had drawn him in. And he shook his head slightly, a faint, almost disbelieving smile touching the corner of his mouth, because for someone who had spent years believing That everything followed a pattern, a system, a predictable line from cause to effect. Tonight had not fit into any of that, and yet it had made more sense than anything else. And as he finally turned the key in the ignition, the engine coming to life with a low, steady rumble, he glanced once more down the street where the ambulance had gone, and though he could no longer see it, he felt something connected to that direction, a quiet thread that had not been cut, only stretched forward, and as he pulled away from the curb, merging back into the empty road, he carried that feeling with him, not as a question, but as an understanding, that sometimes the moments that change you do not arrive loudly. They come quietly, on small paws, asking nothing more than for you to follow. The road stretched ahead of Daniel in long, quiet lines as he drove through the sleeping town, the tires of his patrol car humming softly against the damp pavement. And though everything around him had returned to its familiar shape, something inside him had shifted in a way he could not ignore, the kind of change that does not announce itself but settles slowly, like light breaking through clouds after a long storm. And he found his thoughts drifting back again, not to the call itself, but to the small details that refused to fade, the way the puppy had waited in the rain without moving, the way it had looked at him not with fear, but with certainty, as if it had known all along that he would be the one to follow. And he tightened his grip slightly on the steering wheel, his eyes focused on the empty stretch ahead, yet seeing something else entirely, something deeper, something older, and after a few moments, he made a quiet decision without overthinking it, his hand reaching for the radio, his voice calm but carrying a new edge of purpose as he requested an update from the hospital. The words simple, routine, but the reason behind them anything but ordinary. And there was a brief pause before the response came through, the dispatcher's tone steady, informing him that the child had arrived safely and was receiving care, stable, conscious, expected to recover. And Daniel closed his eyes for just a second, a breath leaving him that felt heavier than it should have, as if something he had been holding onto for years had finally loosened its grip. And he nodded slightly, though no one could see him, murmuring a quiet acknowledgement before setting the radio back. And for a moment, he simply drove, letting the information settle, letting it move through him without resistance. And then, almost without realizing it, a new question surfaced, not sharp or demanding, but steady and persistent. What about the puppy? And he glanced toward the passenger seat, empty now, the absence noticeable in a way that surprised him. And he exhaled slowly, a faint shake of his head following, as if trying to dismiss the thought. But it remained, quiet and present, and without another word, he adjusted the wheel slightly, turning off his current route and heading toward the hospital, the decision made not out of obligation, but something closer to instinct. And as he drove, the streets began to show signs of life returning, a few lights flickering on in distant windows, the sky above shifting from deep night to a faint gray hint of early morning. And the world felt like it was beginning again, slowly, gently, without rush. And when he finally pulled into the hospital parking lot, the building stood calm and steady, its lights warm against the fading darkness, and Daniel sat for a moment before stepping out, the cool air greeting him once more, softer now, less biting. And as he walked toward the entrance, his pace unhurried but certain, he realized something simple yet profound, that sometimes the end of one moment is not an ending at all, but an invitation to continue. And whatever had begun with a small, silent guide in the rain had not finished when the ambulance doors closed. It had only moved forward, waiting for him to follow once more. The hospital doors slid open with a soft mechanical whisper as Daniel stepped inside, the warm air wrapping around him with a quiet steadiness that contrasted the long, damp night he had just left behind, and the scent of antiseptic and coffee drifted faintly through the lobby, familiar and grounding, yet somehow different this time, as if the place held more than routine, more than the passing of hours. And he paused just beyond the entrance, his eyes adjusting to the bright lights, taking in the quiet movement of nurses at the desk, the low murmur of voices, the steady rhythm of a place that never truly slept. And for a moment he simply stood there, letting himself arrive fully, not rushing forward, not pushing the moment ahead, just present. And then he approached the front desk, his voice calm as he spoke, giving the brief details, asking about the child brought in not long ago, and the nurse nodded gently, her expression softening as she recognized the situation, pointing him down a quiet hallway with a simple direction, and Daniel thanked her with a small nod before turning. His steps measured as he moved through the corridor, the sound of his boots softened by the polished floor, the lights overhead casting a steady glow that seemed to stretch time into something slower, something more reflective, and as he walked, his mind did not race ahead, it lingered, returning again to the image of the puppy, the way it had stayed, the way it had followed, and a quiet question settled deeper now, not urgent, but steady, and when he reached the room, the door stood slightly open, a thin line of light spilling into the hallway, and he paused just outside, not out of hesitation, but respect, as if crossing that threshold required something more than movement, and inside, the child rested in the hospital bed, small beneath the blankets, breathing more evenly now, the rise and fall steady, visible, reassuring, and beside the bed, curled gently on a folded towel, was the puppy, its body finally relaxed, eyes half closed but still aware, still present, and Daniel felt something shift again, softer this time, almost like relief settling into place, and he stepped inside quietly, careful not to disturb the calm that had formed in the room, and as he moved closer, the puppy lifted its head slightly, its eyes finding his, recognition passing between them without sound, without need for explanation, and it did not move away, did not tense. It simply watched him with the same quiet certainty it had shown from the beginning, and Daniel stopped a few feet from the bed, his gaze moving from the child to the puppy and back again, taking in the stillness, the safety that had replaced the uncertainty of just hours before, and he let out a slow breath, one that carried with it more than the night, more than the call, something deeper, something that had been waiting longer than he realized. And as he stood there, in the soft light of the early morning, he understood something simple but undeniable, that not all rescues begin with sirens, and not all heroes announce themselves. Some arrive quietly, on small paws, and stay until the world makes sense again. The morning light grew stronger as it slipped through the window, stretching across the floor in soft, quiet lines that seemed to warm everything they touched, and Daniel remained by the bedside, no longer counting the minutes or thinking about the shift he had left behind, because time here moved differently, slower, steadier, shaped not by urgency, but by presence, and the child stirred again, this time more noticeably, a small movement of the hand beneath the blanket, fingers curling slightly, as if reaching for something unseen, and the puppy reacted instantly, lifting its head and inching closer, its nose gently nudging against the edge of the blanket with careful precision, not enough to startle, just enough to remind, to reassure, and Daniel leaned forward slightly, his voice low and calm as he spoke. "Hey there, you are safe now." The words simple, steady, offered without expectation, and the child's eyes opened slowly. Not fully, but enough to register the light, the room, the presence beside them, confusion flickering at first, then easing as the puppy let out a soft, almost silent sound, something between a breath and a whine, and the child's gaze shifted toward it, recognition blooming in that quiet space, and for the first time, a faint, fragile smile touched their face, small but real, and Daniel felt something inside him catch, not sharp, not overwhelming, just enough to remind him that moments like this carried a weight far beyond what could be measured. And he stayed where he was, not stepping closer, not interrupting, allowing that connection to unfold naturally, because it was not his to direct, it was something earned long before he had arrived. And as the child's eyes closed again, not in weakness but in rest, the tension in the room eased even further, settling into a calm that felt complete, and the puppy relaxed once more, lowering its head but keeping its body close, as if it had finally allowed itself to believe that the waiting was over, and Daniel straightened slowly, his gaze moving between them, taking in the quiet resolution of something that had begun in darkness and uncertainty, now resting in light and safety, and he let out a slow breath, one that carried not just relief, but something deeper, something that felt like understanding, because he realized that the puppy had not just led him to a place. It had trusted him to finish what it could not do alone, and that trust, simple and unwavering, had changed something in him that had been closed off for far too long. And as he stepped back slightly, giving the space room to breathe. He felt no urgency to leave, no need to rush back to the world outside, because for the first time in a long while, being exactly where he was felt like enough. And as the sunlight continued to grow, filling the room with a gentle warmth, Daniel understood that some moments do not ask for recognition. They simply ask for you to be present, and in that quiet, steady space, he finally was. Time moved quietly through the room, measured not by clocks but by breath, by light, by the subtle shifts of presence that filled the space. And Daniel remained near the window now, his posture relaxed, his hands resting loosely at his sides as he watched the morning unfold beyond the glass, the sky fully awake, soft shades of gold and pale blue stretching across the horizon. And inside, everything felt steadier, grounded in a calm that no longer felt fragile but settled, as if it had found its place. And the child slept peacefully, the tension that once lingered now replaced by a gentle stillness. And the puppy had shifted slightly closer during the quiet hours, its small body curled with trust, no longer alert in the same way, but resting with the quiet confidence of something that had completed what it set out to do. And Daniel found himself watching that small rise and fall again, not because he needed reassurance anymore, but because it reminded him of something simple and true, that life, even in its quietest form, carries meaning when it is seen. And he took a slow breath, the kind that does not rush, that fills the space fully before leaving. And as he exhaled, a thought came to him, not as a question but as a realization, that there had been a time when he would have walked away sooner, when he would have told himself that his part was done the moment the sirens arrived, that staying longer served no purpose. But this time had been different, not because the situation demanded it, but because something within him had chosen it, and that choice felt unfamiliar yet right, like stepping onto a path that had always been there, but had gone unnoticed. And the door opened softly behind him, a nurse stepping in once more, her expression warm as she checked on the child, adjusting a blanket, making small, careful movements that spoke of experience and quiet care. And she glanced toward Daniel with a gentle nod, acknowledging his presence without needing explanation, and he returned it with a slight tilt of his head, a silent understanding passing between them. And when she left again, the room returned to its stillness, the kind that no longer felt empty but full, carrying something that lingered beyond the visible. And Daniel stepped a little closer to the bed once more, his gaze soft as it rested on the small figure, then on the puppy. And for a moment, he hesitated, not out of uncertainty, but because he understood that some moments ask for a different kind of courage, not the kind that runs toward danger, but the kind that stays, that chooses connection even when it would be easier to remain distant. And slowly, he reached down, his hand moving carefully toward the puppy, pausing just before contact, giving it the choice. And after a brief second, the puppy lifted its head, its eyes meeting his with that same quiet certainty, and it leaned forward just enough to close the distance, its small nose brushing lightly against his fingers. And Daniel felt that simple contact settle into him more deeply than he expected, not dramatic, not overwhelming, but real. And he let his hand rest there for a moment, gentle, steady, before slowly drawing it back. And as he straightened, something within him felt different, not changed all at once, but opened, as if a door he had kept closed without realizing had quietly shifted. And as the morning light filled the room completely, he understood that sometimes the moments that matter most are not the ones we plan, but the ones we choose to stay for, long after the world says we are free to leave. Daniel stood quietly for a final moment beside the bed, the room now fully touched by morning light, the shadows gone, replaced by a soft clarity that made everything feel honest and still. And he let his gaze rest one last time on the child, breathing steadily, safe, no longer alone in the silence that had once surrounded them. And then on the puppy, still curled close, its small body rising and falling in a rhythm that no longer carried urgency, only peace. And something in that simple image settled deeply within him, the kind of understanding that does not need words, only time to take root. And he took a slow breath before turning toward the door, his steps unhurried as he moved across the room, not leaving because he had to, but because he understood that staying forever was not the purpose, only staying long enough to matter. And as he reached the doorway, he paused, his hand resting lightly against the frame. And behind him, the puppy lifted its head once more, its eyes finding him with that same quiet awareness, and for a brief second, neither of them moved, the moment holding itself in a gentle stillness. And Daniel gave the smallest nod, not a command, not a goodbye, just a recognition, and the puppy blinked slowly, as if understanding, before lowering its head again, returning to its place beside the child, and Daniel stepped out into the hallway, the door closing softly behind him, the sound not final, but complete. And as he walked down the corridor, the hospital now awake with the quiet movement of a new day, he felt the difference in his steps, lighter, not because the world had changed, but because something inside him had. And when he reached the exit, the glass doors opened once more, letting in the cool, fresh air of the morning, and the sky stretched wide above the parking lot, pale blue with the first warmth of sunlight touching the edges. And Daniel stepped outside, pausing briefly as he looked out across the open space, the town beginning to stir, life continuing in its quiet, steady way. And he realized that for the first time in a long while, he was not simply moving through it. He was part of it again, present in a way he had almost forgotten was possible. And he walked toward his patrol car, the familiar shape waiting where he had left it. But even that felt different now, not just a place of duty, but a place he could return to with something more than routine. And as he opened the door and slid into the seat, he did not start the engine right away. Instead, he sat for a moment, hands resting on the wheel, eyes forward, letting the quiet settle one last time. And in that stillness, a simple truth became clear, that he had not been looking for anything when the night began, not answers, not meaning, not change, but somehow, through the smallest guide and the quietest path, he had found all three. And as he finally turned the key, the engine coming to life beneath him, he carried that understanding forward, not as a burden, but as something steady and enduring, because sometimes the world does not ask you to be perfect. It only asks you to follow when it matters most, and to stay when it would be easier to walk away. And in doing so, you might just find that the thing you were meant to save was never only someone else, but a part of yourself that had been waiting patiently to be found again.